The Cowboys made a big re-signing on Wednesday. We'll tell you who it is on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Just a little show note for you guys. On tomorrow's show, Thursday show, we're going to recap the Senior Bowl practices. We wanted to get a few practices out of the way before we start commenting on these players. So be on the lookout for that on Thursday. But Landon, today we're going to talk about some Cowboys news. And we've got some big news, and this one comes directly from the Dallas Cowboys. They've extended Will McClay, who in all reality is their GM, right? He's in charge of running the draft. He's in charge of helping build the board, build the free agency board. There was some rumblings that maybe he wouldn't return as his contract was set to expire after the draft. How big of a win is it for Dallas to finally lock somebody up early?
Well, it's enormous. I mean, I think, and I think, really bucking the trend of signing guys before they really need to, right?
Yes.
I think, it's enormous every year. Every time that we get a Will McClay re-signing, it's enormous. I mean, and I think it has everything to do with how this team is structured, how this team, how he works with the Joneses. Look, I mean, we all have complaints about the Joneses and Steven and Jerry specifically, and their very differing views on it's seemingly increasingly differing views about how to run this teum.
And whether or not we're in a drought or not, right?
Yep. I think Will McClay is not only a voice of reason. Look, let's talk about this real quick. Jerry Jones, there's a misconception that Jerry Jones doesn't listen to anybody, and he makes these decisions on his own, and he's kind of a wildcatter, just kind of does his own thing. That is absolutely the opposite of the truth. The problem with Jerry Jones is that he probably talks to too many people, right? And when Larry Lassell was still alive, he was probably talking to him way too much. It's like, I think if anything, Jerry has a group of folks that he really, really trusts on football matters, and he gets all their opinions. And sometimes, sometimes it can be a little bit of a case of the last person to speak to Jerry gets the kind of final word in. I think it's so pertinent with keeping that in mind and keeping in mind how the management style of the Joneses, having Will McClay there as a trusted voice who is one of the best personnel guys in all of football. I think we can say that. I think, and again, someone that the Joneses deeply, deeply trust, came up in the Cowboys system. I think having someone like that around is what is going to keep you even close to relevant in these days, right? Without Will McClay, I just think that this ship would spin completely out of control. But it's because McClay is standing there next to the Jones boys that I feel, a lot more comfortable about what the front office does on a general day-to-day basis than I certainly would without him. And probably certainly do more than the average Cowboys fan. So he is as important, singularly important to this team as probably any single person in this organization.
And one of the ways that I judge if you're a good GM is the wrong word, because he's not really the GM, but he's in charge of the drafts, right? Is how consistently can you find talent on day three? Because I think, and we've seen this play out in the war room, like the Cowboys like to get plenty of opinions from not only Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones, but their coaches and a lot of people when it comes to early round picks. But once you get later in the draft, your ability to find contributors on day three is really what makes good GMs from bad GMs. And he's consistently done that, whether it's like go back to 2022. They got Deron Bland, Jake Ferguson, Damone Clark, who I know didn't have a good season this year, but Izzy Makamu in 2020, Tyler Biadasz in 2020 as well. Like they've consistently found good talent on day three. I think he does a really good job of building the board. And I think he does a really good job of connecting the front office, Jerry and Steven, to the coaching staff. And that's why they've had some pretty good drafts over the last half decade.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all heard the term glue guy before,
Yeah.
right? And generally it means a guy that kind of just keeps it all together. I can't think of a more apt term for Will McClay, right? He is the connective tissue between the front office, the coaching staff, and the personnel department. He is a former coach. He is a former player. He understands how the coaches think. One of the big things that he's talked about year in and year out is the importance of strong communication. And in fact, there was an interview, I think just 2 days ago, yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, at Mobile with Will McClay, in which he talked about the importance of Schottenheimer and his over communication is what he referred to, right? And the importance of just over communicating what you're looking for and your needs and wants and desires in these players and what you're trying to get out of them and what kind of football you are into and how that it feeds and informs the types of players you want. And I think that that's one thing that McClay has been incredible at is collecting the information from the coaches, understanding what they want, collecting the information from the front office, collecting the information from his own scouting department, and then building consensus inside the building for players, right? And I think I'll even point out one more thing. Even on the negative picks, right? I saw Brian Broaddus tweeting about this today. When they picked Taco Charlton, it's commonly well known that Rod Marinelli was the guy that was driving that pick, right? Brian, is good friends with Will McClay and was trying to get him to, fess up and admit, hey, this is a Rod Marinelli pick, right? This isn't necessarily something you wanted. Will McClay refused to kind of, throw Rod Marinelli under the bus. And I think I understand how that makes some fans upset, but I think as far as what he is trying to accomplish to build consensus, to create a safe place for all people to be able to express their opinions so that they can get the best information out on draft day. I think Will McClay is that's a great example of Will McClay protecting his sources, protecting his folks, understanding the importance of the secrecy inside that room and the trust in there, and continuing that, in his process, throughout the years.
And this doesn't mean that he's perfect, because he's not perfect. There's no drafter that is, but I think we've got enough of a sample now that shows that the Cowboys are a above average drafting team. I would hate to lose that guy that everybody in the building respects, and somebody who has some coaching experience. He goes down on the field and he watches practice and he goes to all these different sites to watch the college games. I don't know how many guys out there are like Will McClay that you could replace. I'm glad that he very easily could be a GM somewhere else.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad that he's staying here for an extended period of time.
I will add in too that people are constantly talking about why doesn't he go and lead his own team? There is an aspect of this that's really great for Will McClay. He gets to do basically purely football stuff and not deal with any of that other nonsense that a lot of other GMs kind of have to deal with. So I think
if he messes up a pick, everybody's just going to blame Jones's anyway.
There's also nice. That. I do think that as much as people are kind of nervous that Will McClay is going to look at this situation and get pissed and leave. I mean, honestly, if it was me, I have a billionaire who loves me and is going to constantly be giving me new contracts, is going to step in front of any bad picks I make, and he's going to take care of the day-to-day minutia BS that you have to deal with as a GM. Man, sign me up for that year in and year out.
Well, it's like we see this with Jacksonville play out. A lot of the job of the GM is to kind of suck up to the owner and make it seem like you're the smartest person in the room so you don't get fired, right? Will doesn't have to worry about that because the Joneses love him. There's no real worry that he has to lose his job, so he can just go out and do his actual job. So I think it makes a lot of sense for Dallas. It makes a lot of sense for Will McClay. And for the long-term vision of this team, I think having Will McClay in the front office does give you some hope that maybe they can turn things around.
Absolutely. I mean, he's the jewel of what makes you feel hope, I think, for the long-term health of the Cowboys.
All right. We also got some other news in a really interesting article from Jory Epstein about some of the future players of the Dallas Cowboys and what they're going to do over the next couple of months. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you're going to win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where one of the starting quarterbacks only needs to throw for 1 yard to win. Pair that with one other correct pick, and you're cashing out. This week, I'm looking at the board and selecting more on the Travis Kelce receiving yards and the more on the Patrick Mahomes passing yardage. Well, what do I love most about PrizePicks? The fast, safe withdrawals. And when I win, my cash is in my account in as little as 15 minutes. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are reacting to the latest news regarding the Dallas Cowboys. We got an interesting article from Jory Epstein where she was talking about one of the reasons the Cowboys hired Matt Eberflus is because it's a third defensive system in 3 years. And they thought this would be the closest to what they were running last year. So to help them continue to kind of improve on that side of the ball. In that article, she mentions that Stephen Jones has said that it's going to be a priority to bring back Osa Odigizua, the Cowboys' star defensive tackle. Now, they've said this kind of stuff in the past, but I want to ask you, do you believe that?
Well, I mean, I think it's all tied into whether we believe the kind of other conversation that's come out since the Schottenheimer press conference, in which they talked about how they want to take a look at their free agent spending this offseason and potentially maybe make some adjustments there if needed. Look, right now it's all lip service. I'm not going to try to tell you that any of this is anything other than lip service right now. But I think, look, there's been times when they wouldn't even give us the lip service on this, right? Like, so I do think that there is something to the fact that they're at least recognizing that this is something that they need to do. And whether it actually gets done is another thing. But I do think that there is something to the idea that they are at least saying that they need to do this. So I'm hoping that they make real efforts. Now, the question will also, I mean, it's 2 steps, right? Will they actually make an effort? And then how quality will their effort be, right? Because I've seen them make efforts and they've just been piss poor efforts at times to re-sign guys and just, insulting offers to re-sign guys. So if it's a serious effort, understanding that Osa is a guy who is likely to command a pretty big number on the free agent market as one of the real only pass rushing defensive tackles, I mean, I think available out there outside of maybe Milton Williams from the Eagles. I think that's going to be the question is are they going to be willing to throw, I don't know, Marcus, you tell me 20 million plus a season, right?
So there's an article coming out tomorrow for the 33rd team when I wrote about 5 players that could get much bigger deals than you expect. Mm-hmm. And one of those names is Osa. And it's not hard to look at. Like if you have an analytics staff at all on your payroll, they're going to look at his win rate, his disruption rate, and the fact that he had 4 more quarterback hits than any other defensive tackle in the league this year. Any other defensive tackle, Chris Jones, Cam Hayward, Dexter Lawrence, he was better than all those guys at knocking down the quarterback. I think he's going to get paid. Now, there's a bunch of teams in the league that have like over $100 million of cap that they're going to have to spend. The Cowboys aren't one of those teams, so they're going to have to create some cap room. But I keep coming back to this. Like, let's say they don't pay Osa and he just gets a lot more money than they expect or more money than they offer. How do you fix that position? Because I'm looking at free agency. You mentioned the name. Like Milton Williams is the only other name, and he's probably going to get more money than
he's going to get more money for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
You look at the draft. Mason Graham probably not going to be available to you at pick 12. I don't know if you want to be a good defense in 2025. I don't know how you do that without Osa Odigizua.
Look, I think that there are. We'll talk about it when we talk about Senior Bowl stuff. I mean, we've been watching the Senior Bowl. We're just not ready to talk about it yet. But one of the things I thought that I've noticed is there is quite a few decent day 2, late day 1 looking defensive tackles in this class.
I agree.
I don't know that I don't know that that's like, an option A. Like, I
It
think
can't be a starter. Like,
yeah,
I think the way to do this is the way they did it a couple years ago. Like, you draft Osa, and on day 2, let him kind of work into the rotation, and then maybe eventually that guy becomes a starter. But defensive tackles take forever to develop.
Yeah, you need a starter and one of these rookies.
Yes.
Is what I think. Like, so I think they need to re-sign Osa and then still consider potentially drafting another defensive tackle in the third or second or third round, right? So I think that's kind of how they'll have to attack it. And if they don't get Osa, then it's going to need to be a kind of a cobbled together solution, right? It'll have to be a situation where you get a lesser free agent. I mean, I think the question is, are they going to be willing to spend on free agency? And then the second question is, are they going to be willing to spend on Osa levels of free agency, right? And if the answer is no on that second question, but they are willing to spend money in free agency, then you're probably going to have to go get somebody. Maybe what you do is you'd use that money to re-sign Chauncey Golson or something like that. Maybe. And then you try to cobble together a solution with a rookie, some reduced defensive ends and pass rushing situations, and then, a couple other veteran big body defensive tackles just to kind of play on rundowns. And then you hope that, NASCAR type packages with bigger body defensive ends inside at 3 technique can get the job done. But that certainly is not the way you want to attack this. No. Like, you'd want to attack this with having a top end guy at the spot, a draft pick behind him learning, and then a whole bunch of waves of defensive ends as needed in NASCAR packages on passing downs.
So I asked an agent friend of mine that deals with these kind of contracts, like, what is the market going to look like for Osa? His exact numbers, he said, 4 years, 42 million guaranteed, 85 million total. So you're looking at like 21 million a year. And I know that the sticker shock is really high, but once you get down to after Milton Williams and Osa Odighizuwa, like, let me give you the top names of the defensive tackles available. It's Calais Campbell going into his age 39 season. Jaron Reed, who's 33, I believe now for the Seahawks. Deshaun Wharton, Tier Tart, DJ Jones. Like, I would rather just pay Osa. Maybe you feel like it's $4 million more a year than what you want to pay for Osa, rather than having to overpay a 39-year-old Calais Campbell.
Yeah, and again, like, I think the real problem here is, as you mentioned it, is the development time of defensive tackles, yes. Right? Like, you don't. It's pretty rare to get these guys that come in as rookies and have a major impact. So if you don't do something about the position, you're kind of setting your defense back, a season or two before it's going to really be able to hit its prime. So. I think it's really important that you find a way to either re-sign Osa or an equivalent defensive tackle, which ultimately that's only Milton Williams, and I think he's going to be more expensive. So
yeah,
they really need to find.
And I asked about Milton Williams. It's 3 years, 65 million, which is basically the exact same number per year. Milton Williams is a little bit smaller than Osa, a little bit lighter than Osa, so. It's not going to make a difference. I mean, they're basically the same type of player, right? So,
yeah,
it's going to be really tough. Now, I do wonder if the Cowboys are going to adjust some of the way they handle free agency, in the sense of like, okay, we'll pay Osa, but Jordan Lewis, you're going to be 30 this year, and we love what you've done, and we know how important you are, but we have a hard time giving somebody like Jordan Lewis, who's going into his age, whatever the season is, 30, 31, a lot of guaranteed money. Maybe that's the adjustment they're going to make.
Yeah, maybe it's, again, it's about the contracts that they're handing out. Like, and look, I think part of the reason, we don't want to get into a whole thing here, but part of the reason that the Cowboys have started becoming a little bit frugal with some of these contracts and not signing these contracts early, it's not just because they just decided they didn't like it. They got burned on several of these contracts in a row. And again, we can discuss the choices they made on who they decide to sign those contracts early, because I think ultimately that's the issue. But I don't think that it's necessarily fair to think that the Joneses have never spent money or signed guys early. If anything, they've been accused of doing that too much at times. So I think it's more about kind of swinging the door back the other direction, and just being a little bit more judicious about which beloved Cowboys players you're signing to early contracts, because not all of them are worthy of early contracts.
I really want to re-sign the guys that are durable, that are reliable, and that continue to get better and better. And I think Osa Odigizua fits
Yeah.
every single one of
Yes.
them. On top of it being a really important position, and historically a position where these guys, as they get into their late 20s, are a lot of times better than what they are
That's
in
right.
their early 20s. It's not one of these positions where once you hit age 28, 29, your play decreases. We just saw Cam Hayward for the Steelers have his best year of his career at age 35 in all pro season. So I'm saying all this to say, bring back Osa Odigizua. I don't think they have a
I
choice.
agree 100%. Sign him, please, today.
All right. We also got another note about the Cowboys offensive coordinator search from Jory's article. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on the progress so that you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, in this Jory article, she wrote about how the Cowboys are looking for an offensive coordinator that can really be like a run game coordinator that can work on the protections. We know that Brian Schottenheimer is going to be calling the plays, running the offense. What type of offensive coordinator does this mean? Do we have any names that fit this description?
Yeah, the name that's kind of being floated around is Clayton Adams. He's an offensive line coach for Arizona, and let's talk about this structure of this offensive unit first, because I think that's what's fascinating, right? So obviously Schottenheimer is the one who's calling plays. That's been confirmed at this point. So this a very similar situation organizationally what you had with Mike McCarthy, right? A head coach who's calling the plays. What's changing now is the job description, I think, and the kind of the way that they're managing the offensive coordinator position. And I think this is really smart. And look, let's talk about Clayton Adams real quick. Very well-respected offensive line coach. And I think you can talk about his run game by just talking about the Cowboys' experience versus the Cardinals, right? Like, think about how the Cowboys have in some of these games the Cowboys have played against the Cardinals, and they are very difficult games. They're very physical games. Those teams were able to run right all over Dallas and use kind of very varied run games that use a lot of counters, a lot of power, a lot of mixing in kind of different stuff, and just really kind of cutting edge, at least wide variety of run style stuff. I think that's desperately what the Cowboys need here, right? Like, and having a guy that they can bring in as their offensive coordinator who is an offensive line coach brings stability to one of the most important positional coaching spots you can have, right? One of the problems you have with having offensive line coaches is that if you have a good one, unless there's someone like Stoutland or Scarmetti, or I always forget Scarnecchi's last name, that is like to the point in their career where they only want to be an offensive line coach. It's hard to hold on to good young offensive line coaches, right? Think Bill Callahan, right? Yep. Callahan was constantly trying to be an offensive coordinator, and he wasn't really a great offensive coordinator as far as a play caller, but you really, really wanted him as your offensive line coach, right? So this is a way to kind of to shield your offensive line coach from being poached by other teams. If you make him your offensive coordinator, he can design the run plays, the blocking schemes, and also the protection schemes, which I think is another thing that was mentioned in the article, which I think is an important aspect of this. And that allows you kind of to hopefully retain, if it works out, your offensive line coach a little bit more long-term, because he's technically your offensive coordinator. So I really like this. I mean, I think, look, Shoddy has a history as a passing coordinator, obviously as an offensive coordinator overall. But I mean, I think, his area of expertise is in the passing game and designing, that sort of the routes and the timing and the drops with the quarterback. I think getting somebody in here to specifically focus on the run game to kind of level it up to an area just beyond a secondary thought and actually have it be a main focus of this offense, and then have that same person designing protections. I think that also helps you marry your run and your pass game a lot easier, because play action becomes a lot easier if you can make the blocking schemes look as similar as possible. So I just think there's a lot of sense in this kind of offensive structure that sort of helps everybody do specifically what they do best the most, and not having to worry about maybe dealing with other aspects that they are not as strong as.
So I did the research. There's only one team in the league that has something similar to this, and it's actually the Green Bay Packers, who have Adam Stenavich, who is an offensive line coach and a run game coordinator, as their offensive coordinator. And I think that's interesting. And we've seen Green Bay's offensive lines over the last couple of years be really good, despite maybe not having elite talent. So again, maybe that's an example of why they should be going this way. I was also looking for like the connection, like why Clayton Adams. He played football at Boise State, so that makes sense.
There it is.
It was a walk-on at Boise State and ended up becoming an all-conference player. But Clayton Adams is also somebody who he's been an assistant offensive line coach before with the Colts. Remember when those Colts had those awesome offensive lines, like 2019, 2020? He was there, and then he graduated to the tight end coach, and now he's been the offensive line coach for the Cardinals for the last couple of years. He was also in the college ranks. He was an offensive tackle coach. Then he was an offensive line coach, back to tight end coach at San Jose State. And then he was a running back coach. So like he's got lots of experience working with different types of players. But one of the things you'll notice, it's all like offensive line, tight end, protection stuff. And if you've got Shoddy designing the offense and running the plays, it's probably not a bad idea to have an offensive coordinator who specializes in making sure that everything's blocked up really well.
Yeah. And again, I think it's, this plus, having an offensive line coach to me. And again, they already also have an assistant offensive line coach that they've now hired. There's been rumors and whispers about potentially a Mark Colombo reunion, but either way, no matter what, they're going to sign another offensive line coach. And I think that's really what I'm getting at, is that the commitment to the offensive line is what's important here. I think that's something that you cannot hand wave. I think it's probably the second most important position on this team outside of the quarterback, right? You really need to have stability in your offensive line. And you've got a group of young, talented guys who I think you could develop into something, and you get a couple more draft picks in here, and you may really have a really solid, good group of offensive linemen here that could be a strength of your team. And as we've seen in these conference title games, that's a priority. That's something that you need if you want to get to the upper echelon of the NFL. You need to have continuity and strength in the offensive line position, not only to protect your quarterback, but also to buoy the other side of your offense, which, in turn helps your defense as well.
And again, it's not always apples to apples, but I will say that Arizona offensive line this year that was starting a lot of young players and the guys that they acquired in free agency ended up being one of the better units in the league. So we'll see. I mean, this is not confirmed or anything, but it does seem like the Cowboys have a lot of interest here in Clayton Adams. So be on the lookout for more news there. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Check out the YouTube channel. We post videos every single day over there. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.